About 2/3 of business strategies never get implemented, partly because leadership, both from the top and inside implementation teams, just don't measure up to deliver what's required. That's according to my next guest, who's intervened in over 150 Fortune 500 companies around the world to align leadership better with internal policies and organisational culture. Douglas McEncroe, who leads the Douglas McEncroe Group and now represents CCL in Australia, began in Europe, and he's executed hundreds of transformational corporate projects, and he joins me now in the studio. Douglas McEncroe, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me, Helen.
Now, what I wanted to start with, because so much gets written about leadership, so much gets taught about leadership. It is a very intangible kind of phenomenon. Have you been able to, over your 2.5 decades or whatever it is, to hone down the top 3 or 4 principles that really separate ordinary from great leadership in corporates?
It is, you're right, it is very intangible. If you think of behaviours, there could be 100 different behaviours you could associate with good leaders. But in CCL, we have a model which describes the process in which good leadership happens. And basically, they do 3 things. They set the direction, they get the alignment, and they get the commitment of the people. And now that's quite complex because first...
Complex, and it's hard if you don't have those skills to be able to do that.
Well, that's the thing. You have to have the skills to actually see what direction you have to go, be able to communicate it. And I think half the reason strategies don't get executed is because the people don't know what the strategy is. And then get alignment, get all the parts of the organisation and even stakeholders outside of the organisation working towards that strategy, and then commitment. Touch the people's hearts, their souls, get them involved, get them committed to making that happen. And that's what good leaders do.
We'll come back to what makes a good leader, but it is interesting. Obviously, you wouldn't have had work over the last 25 years if there hadn't been some serious problems inside corporates.
Sure.
And they happen all the time, and we see them often publicly. A big company implodes, but often we don't see it. It never gets to the public, but there are real problems. What are some of the common serious missteps that happen at a corporate leadership level?
Well, I think people, quite senior leaders, get caught up in the day-to-day. So they're just caught up with execution, maybe thinking about the quarterly returns, the communication to the markets, and they take their eye off the ball. What is changing out there? What needs to happen within the organisation? Does the strategy have to change? And if the strategy changes, the culture has to change. You said before that I think 66% of strategies don't get implemented, half the time because the culture sabotages the strategy. So to answer your question, the big thing is that leaders take their eye off the ball and they're just caught up in the day-to-day. They can get carried away with arrogance. It can be another problem.
They think their own way is the only way and the best way, and they don't listen to anyone else? Right. Is that what you mean?
And they stop consulting in a very complex world. Not only are their organisations complex, so they need to lead across boundaries, and we've actually done a lot of research on that, to engage all the people, to get their perspectives, to get their ideas, and to come up with the future path. And that's why innovation is so important today, because it's so complex, the world. It's changing so quickly. And if you're just in the day-to-day, you're not seeing those changes, and you're not adapting your organisation to do that. The other thing with that is that they do nothing to develop the next generation of leaders. So there's so much in the day-to-day, and they go, and I've seen many organisations where the CEO goes and there's no one for 5 years who can really step up to the plate and take over.
So succession planning is just hugely important. Obviously hugely. Chairmen and women and boards have to, that's their main responsibility, but it has to be developed in the executive ranks.
And it should be happening right through the organisation. And again, senior managers forget that the younger and junior people, they don't listen to what they say, they watch what they do. And if they don't invest any time in being with their own people and developing their own people, well, why would they do it themselves? Because the message is that's not important here.
You've obviously been in from the outside to a number of the big companies. I want to get to some of those examples in a minute, but can you teach leadership? Can you teach these skills?
Yeah, well, look, we've been working working since 1970, so 45 years of developing.
Oh, you're far too young to have been working all that time, but you mean CCL has been developing these sort of leadership programs?
So 500,000 leaders. What we try to do, we have a three-leg model, if you like: assessment, challenge, and support. So people need to know what is happening, where they are, what has to be done, and they have to have more self-awareness. They have to know their impact on other people, and then once that's clear, you have to push them. You have to push them out of their circle of comfort, and you have to support them. So you have to do all three things. So leadership can be developed. What's interesting is that most of the learning actually comes from what you actually experience. So we know that 70% of learning actually comes from thinking about your own experience. So you have to create, yes. So you have to create processes that people can reflect and see what has worked for them and what hasn't, and what they need to change. So leadership development and teaching leadership isn't actually going in and telling people, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. Yeah. You've got to facilitate that they can learn from themselves, understand their context, understand what needs to happen, and say, here am I, this is what I'm like, this is the impact I'm having, this is what we need to do, what do I need to change? And then they need support.
Now, we're going to run out of time, but you have gone in from the outside, as I say. You've dealt with some key issues at companies like Vodafone in Europe. I mean, they're big brands that we know, of course, in Australia. Electrolux, what were the problems in there, and what did they need to do to change? Because preparing companies for change, there's so much disruption, so much change at the moment across all different industries. Yeah. Just tell me a couple of examples.
Well, look, the Electrolux one was very interesting because there was a real engineering mindset. You know, we produce this, and if the customers don't like it...
We produce a machine, and it happens to be a vacuum cleaner.
A vacuum cleaner, and that's what you have to do to produce it. And not quite what the client wants, but, you know, that's what we can produce.
Really?
So they had a CEO called Hans Strober. He was a great guy. He was almost like a young JFK, very charismatic. But what he did, he realized that this is not going to cut it. We have to be more client-focused. And so he really led a whole change over 10 years, supported by leadership development programs, saying that, you know, we have to change our things, and if we have to change the production, we have to change the production. But this is a guy with 135,000 employees. He came to the leadership programs and explained why they have to change and what that means for leadership, and he also listened to them and got their perspectives. That was, you know, so he walked the talk, if you like.
So listening was absolutely key in that experience. What about Vodafone? How did you kind of help them to help themselves?
Well, Vodafone was an interesting situation because that had incredible growth, so it was really easy to motivate people because everyone was earning lots of money. Then things changed. There was still growth, but they realized that the leaders right through the company had to spend time in developing their people. So we helped them understand the importance of that, give them techniques to do it, and over 5 years they measured this. You know, the climate in the company actually went up markedly just because managers were spending more time with their people in development, and the results improved as well.
Oh, it's just a fascinating subject, and obviously because you go in from the outside, you can see with and I mean, you're not the only sort of leadership person who helps companies do this, but to go in from outside, you have a much clearer vision of what's going on. Just tell me, some of the best managers, are they the ones who listen?
I think listening is absolutely essential, you know, and a certain emotional intelligence, listening with your ears and listening with your heart.
Douglas McEncroe, it's been a great pleasure talking to you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much, Helen, for having me. It's been a pleasure.